you are, you don't need to be controlled. You'll volunteer. Most people think that mind control is something that's done to them, right? But it's actually something you participate in. So remember that mind control is not like a conspiracy. It's not hypnosis. Essentially, mind control is identity management, right? It's how they project and initiate an image for you. And it's managed through social normalcies and things that are considered good and bad, right? And so this is how they get you with the mind control. They manage your identity. This episode is not about motivation, right? It's not about blame. It's about comprehension, period. Because when you comprehend how identity works, control becomes visible, right? You start to see it more clearer. All right, so let's start with what knowledge of self is not. It's not personality traits, right? It's not ego. It's not your job title. It's knowing where your beliefs came from, knowing what culture shaped your thinking, and knowing which ideas were inherited versus which ideas were chosen. All right? Knowing where your beliefs came from. Very important. So, we all have an idea about what we think we believe in, right? But where did your belief system come from, right? So for a lot of us, that came from our parents, right? Our parents essentially taught us what they believed. But where did they learn what they believed, right? And what were their social influences? And you have to be mindful of this, because this will tell you the story about how and why you think the way you think, and why you project things the way you do, and why you perceive things the way you do. Knowing what culture shaped your thinking. Now, this is another pivotal point, because essentially culture determines the thinking. Unless you have the ability to step outside of the box with your thoughts, then your mindset essentially gets swayed by the culture. Because again, the culture dictates what you should value, right? And what's considered like popping, or what this is what it is, right? And so when you start to say, well, I don't think so, right? That's not necessarily popping to me. You start to disassociate yourself from the norm. However, why, right? And what's leading you to that thinking? This is very important. Now, knowing which ideas were inherited and which ideas was chosen, right? So what part of your thinking did you choose, right? And what part of your thinking is inherited? See, this is a challenge to you to sit there and evaluate it. What part of my thinking did I inherit from my family, from the people around me, from my culture? And then what part of my thinking did I choose on my own, right? Did I do research to either validate what I've been taught or disprove what I've been taught? And now my choices and not my choices, but now my knowing and my belief system is structured in my choices. I'm choosing to believe this way, right? So I didn't inherit this belief. So this is a real distinction that really challenges us and really taps into what knowledge of self is about. Now, very important to remember, if you don't know where your beliefs came from, then you will defend them like they're your own. You understand? Now, why is that statement so profound? Because most of the beliefs that we defend, right, are someone else's, right? My mama taught me this. My daddy taught me this. I learned this from the church. I learned this from wherever. And so people defend that, sometimes to the death. But the truth is, when you know where your beliefs come from, you don't have to defend them. See? You don't have to get out of character and feel like you need to physically impose yourself, or mentally violate somebody, or spiritually violate somebody, or emotionally bully someone for your beliefs, because you know where your beliefs came from. But now when your beliefs are inherited, right, when there's someone else's beliefs, then you will defend them, because essentially you feel like you're defending the person or you're defending the entity, or you're defending whatever it is or wherever it is that you got that belief system from. And this is very important. And this is how you know the difference. Because again, you don't need to defend what you believe in. Not when you know where it came from. There's 3 reasons to me why people fall for everything or fall for anything, right? And the first one to me is unformed identity. Because unformed identity creates insecurity, right? Now, this is very important. Unformed identity, right, creates insecurity. And this is why we see insecurity show up in so many people that we see. And remember, a lot of the hostility, a lot of the pushback we get from people, especially for no reason, comes from insecurity, right? That's all it comes from. Very important to know the difference. The second thing to understand is that insecurity seeks belonging, right? Not so much in a misery loves company kind of way, but insecurity seeks belonging. This is where the insecurity usually stems from, right? It's an acceptance and it's a belonging to something, right? And so whenever that gets pushed out of frame and whenever that's not validated, then what? The insecurity shows up. Very important, because belonging is not just, hey, can I come? Belonging is an acceptance of thoughts, an acceptance of beliefs, a validation of your mindset, a validation of your physical capabilities, right? All of these things tie into acceptance. You understand? Belonging is offered through ideology, brands, and tribes, right? Belonging through ideology, right? The same type of mindset, right? Branding, right? We agree on certain things being of value. And so you're locked in that way. And then it's tribal, right? Which is your family, your surroundings, your neighborhood, right? All of these things tie into that. So if you take a second here, as you're watching me and listening to this, to just think about this and sit back and evaluate what I'm saying openly, you'll start to see where your beliefs that stem from what you've been told and what you've inherited and what's actually somebody else's belief, you'll see the separation in what you believe and what you've actually found out and researched and chosen on your own. You'll start to see. Now, sometimes they merge together. See? And you'll be like, oh yeah, man, my mother told me that and it's still true to this day, but you know, right? And then other times you see the difference. And now you wonder where your paranoia comes from or certain types of fears and stigmas that you have about things. And these things essentially come from other people's beliefs, right? That you have adopted and that you will now defend to the death. See? That's how it all time. Everything's relative. That's the thing to remember. Everything is relative. 6 degrees of separation with everything. It's very important. Consumer identity. This is a big part of knowledge of self. Consumer identity. We touched on it a little bit here with the branding. So there is a social acceptance that comes from branding, right? So meaning when you buy certain types of bags, certain types of cars, right? Or choose to live in certain types of houses, there's a social acceptance that comes from that, right? This is a consumer identity. See? So meaning a lot of times these things are bought not for the sake of necessity, but for the sake of acceptance, right? And for the sake of people to see that you have these things, right? And so now your identity starts to form around that. You don't even know it though. You know, it's a consumer identity. To whereas you are now, like I remember my mom used to call us something like label whores and things like that. You know, just really putting lots and lots of value on branding. You know, this becomes a part of your identity when you go that route with it. And the last thing to remember with this is advertisers don't sell products, right? They sell different versions of you. See, they're trying to sell you on a version of you, hoping that your identity is not rooted in truth and choice, and therefore they can sell you an image. And if they can get you to buy into this image, then they can get you to what? Be the consumer that you need. And then you'll start to slowly but surely center your entire identity around that, right? To the point where now you're basing value of people and value of self off things, right? So if you don't see the right outfit, or you don't see the right bags or the right shoes, the right type of home, then you're going to not have this much value for this thing or this person or this house or whatever it may be, right? Because your identity has started to be defined by branding and the consumer in you. And the advertisers and the people who sell this, they know that. And so their job is to project onto you, right? To tap into your insecurity and get you to buy into an image. And once they get you to do that, then it's off to the races, because more than likely, you're going to project and teach that to your children and to everybody you know. See? Beautiful from their standpoint. And all through what? A mind control without even controlling you. This is why I tell you how we volunteer it. See? Because it's not a hypnosis. It's not that type of process. It's just a solicitation of thoughts, tapping into what? The insecurity of the people and the not knowing. The not knowing. Very, very important. What I'm about to say is historical and psychological, not emotional and not accusatory. In regards to people, American blacks of African descent, there was a systematic breakdown that took place from slavery, from transporting them slaves from Africa to America, right? Now we know there was plenty of people in America before the slaves got here. There was definitely black people, Native Americans, there was all kind of different people here, contrary to what many people believe. But when the Africans specifically came, and they didn't come, the ones that were brought here, in chains, they needed to be systematically broken down. See, there's a fascinating book called The Willie Lynch Theory that really explains a lot of this, but I'm going to tap into it a little bit because this explains part of the knowledge of self and the inability to unite. So when they brought the people of African descent here, they did not allow them to stay who they were. See, they could not remain and could not know where they came from. Not the Africans. See, them specifically, they had to be broken down and transformed completely, right? It's great power in that. And it's a reason why they isolated the Africans that way. Now, why are we saying that? Because when the Spanish people got a chance to come here, or were brought here, whatever the case may be, they allowed them to stay who they were. So if the guy said his name was Jose, you can stay Jose, right? When Irish people came, Jewish people came, Asian Americans came, all these different country people that came here, they all were allowed to keep their identity. It was only the African people who could not. That man said his name was Kunta Kinte, Mandingo, stuff like this. And they said, no, your name's Toby, or James, stuff like this, right? Just completely whitewashed what it is they believed in and where they came from. And that was so important for them to do, specifically to the African people, right? So when you start to sit back and think about that, now you say, okay, well, if they took away what it is we originally believed in, and they instilled a thought process in us, then that means that we are what? People of African descent, but have European mindsets and concepts and value systems. You understand? And when you have that, you're not going to have the inclusion you want. You're going to have lots of division. It's a constant conflict. This is why people can click up here, but not click up in this way, right? We lock in on our block, we lock in on our area, lock in on our fraternity, et cetera, but on a global thing, there's massive division. And this is one of the most pivotal reasons why. By being raised inside European cultural systems, the mindset of the African person or the American of African descent is severely thwarted. It's severely changed and slanted, right? You no longer have a sense of connection to where you're from. So this is why most American blacks, when they think about back home, it's somewhere in the South. Ironically, where all of the slavery, some of the worst slavery ever practiced by humanity is located, right? So you ask a black person about somebody black that's American about back home, more than likely they're going to tell you about down south. See? They're going to tell you somewhere in the South, more than likely, And that's the only back home that the American blacks have to know. You got to do all kind of research, like Alex Haley to try to, that's who wrote Roots, rest in peace to him. You got to do all kind of research, on top of research, to try to see, where you actually come from. Thinking patterns are taught. Values are conditioned, okay? Culture is installed, right? Remember these three things always. I'll repeat them for you one more time. Thinking patterns are taught. Values are conditioned, and culture is installed. Slavery required more than labor. It required a psychological compliance. See? And this was one of the main reasons why they had to break the African people down the way that they did, right? They needed a psychological compliance. So you're talking about names being removed, languages stripped away, cultural memory erased, right? This is why those limbs had to be taken in such extreme measures, because there was a psychological breakdown that had to happen. See, a psychological compliance, right? Because you need these people to do this willingly or unwillingly, but we need them to do it. And it's better if they're doing it willingly. See? So when you look at it like that, you can see that it wasn't all about hate. It was about control, efficiency. See? Not a lot to do with hate like we think. There was a lot of hate involved, but it was about control efficiency. Because the fact is, you can't have people out there that know that they kings and queens and all type of stuff like that trying to pick no cotton. It's just not going to work out. The man know he's a king. The woman knows she's a queen. She should be getting fanned right now. So trying to get her to pick cotton is crazy. You see? You're trying to get the king of a land here, or princes and princesses to do all this kind of labor. It's not going to happen. So what they needed to do was to get past all of the physical abuse, because again, you can't just keep beating on them, because then they can't physically work, because they're enabled, they whipped and lashed and just all messed up all the time. So you can't really perform proper labor that way. So they had to go about it differently. And the best thing that they could do was break them down psychologically, take away the identity, take away the names, take away the religion, take away the culture. Reinforce it with our way. Change the names, give them a new religion and a new way. And now you got your psychological compliance. How do I know this to be true? Look at what happened when slavery ended, or quote unquote ended. There was a ton of them slaves that decided to stay on the plantation. They had an opportunity, they gave them chances to go, and they did not. Harriet Tubman said that with all the slaves she freed, she could have freed a whole lot more if they knew they were slaves. Right? You just can't get around the thinking and the mindset. This is psychological compliance. And we're seeing it today, right? In our choices and what we decide to buy and what we decide to value, who we decide to honor, right? It's all a psychological compliance, believe me. External validation is self-worth, right? And fighting symbols instead of systems. These are two ways that also systematically break down people. Now, the truth is, this pattern isn't exclusive to Black people or exclusive to Black Americans. This is a people thing here, right? Because one of the main ways to control people is through the process that we've stated throughout this Deactivate Mind Control series. By getting people to buy into externally validating themselves, right? as a self-worth, you get people to have a false sense of reality and a false sense of security, right? The worst thing you can think is that your self-worth is based off the things that you have, right? Because self-worth is intangible that way. You can have a bunch of stuff, man, but no real self-worth. You understand what I'm telling you? Self-worth comes from within. It's a value system within. But again, where does your self-worth come from? Right? Because if you're validating it with things, you know you're sitting in the wrong spot. But again, it takes us right back to the beginning. You believe this? Why do you believe it? Who taught you to believe that, and who taught them? See, is that rooted in knowledge? Is that rooted in superstition? Right? Is it rooted in ignorance and not knowing? And that's why all these little things came about, these sayings and these different phrases that got passed down from generation to generation, right? Did these things come from a bunch of people that just didn't know? They knew what they knew, but had no type of understanding, comprehension about things outside of their, eyes. Very important. See? Very important. How do you reclaim your knowledge of self? Right? The first thing you got to do is study history independently. You study history outside the lens of your school, outside the lens of your family, outside the scope of the people who have already taught you this in the first place. You take an independent stance to study history, to see the evolution, to see where mindset shifts change along the way, and you'll start to see why the people around you think the way that they think and why they've taught you to think that way. And we're not blaming them. It's not a right or wrong thing. This is just about knowing, knowledge of self. You need to know why you think the way you think. The next thing to do is to question inherited beliefs. Now, by questioning them, I don't mean challenging them. See, I don't mean setting out on a quest to disprove them. I mean questioning them. The same way I was just questioning that when I was talking to you just now. Because paradigm defines identity. Whoever shaped and molded your thought process, you need to know. This is your knowledge of self. You're going to have an understanding and an understanding about why you're making the choices that you're making. You want to know why you keep doing that? Get on your quest of knowledge of self, right? And you're going to start finding out. Separate survival from identity. It's the same like when I talk and we say, well, listen, what's the difference between living and survival and surviving? Is there a difference? Absolutely. There is a difference between living and surviving. And you need to try to separate the two. You got to separate the survival from the identity, right? So what it is that you're doing and what it is that's defining who you are, that you're making it, separate that from your identity though. These is character traits. Separate the traits from the identity, right? Very important. And the last thing is to define your values consciously. See, don't define them emotionally, but define them consciously. And this will give you and point you on that right path to really get a knowledge of self and really having an understanding of your thought process. Super important. Remember that mind control works best on people who don't know who they are. And as long as you don't know who you are, then mind control will always work on you. As long as you don't know where your belief system came from, where your value system came from, mind control will always work on you. Otherwise, we don't have no knowledge of self. This is what the whole talk's been about. If you can't determine that, if you can't define that, if you can't separate your choices from what you've been told, what I've sought out and studied and chosen to believe, as opposed to what's been taught and been embedded in my brain, then you have no knowledge of self. Before you argue about the world, ask yourself, who taught you to see it? Peace, y'all.